night, which will hopefully be peppy and upbeat, but maybe a little depressing, and maybe a little bit more conversation about Donald Trump than certainly any of the panelists are likely to want. So let's bring out our wonderful panelists, starting with, she has written for Full Frontal with Samantha B, The Amber Ruffin Show, and A Black Lady Sketch Show. That would be Ashley Nicole Black. His credits include The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and Game Theory with Bomani Jones. Greg Iwinski. And he is the master of the Closer Look segment on Late Night with Seth Meyers, Sal Gentile. So I want to begin with an audience question, just show of hands here. I assume you guys are all fans of late night, so I'm not going to ask that. But I'm curious, how many of you out there actually watch a late night show in its late night time slot the night it airs?
More than I thought.
I think that was roughly what I expected. So I guess my first question for the panelists is, that wasn't unexpected, but is that worrisome? Like, if there are all these people who are fans of what you do, but they're not necessarily watching it in the place that it is assigned for people to do so, is that a good or bad sign for the future?
I have to say, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I'm very optimistic about this. Like, you're laughing at my optimism already. Let me be optimistic. My whole life is pessimistic. Every day, it's a bad thing. I have to make jokes about it. Let me be optimistic for once.
No, I'll put on my happy face. Don't worry, I got it.
No, I am, because, all these shows make things that millions of people watch. Like, the question is just figuring out where they're going to watch it. And that's across the industry. That's everybody is kind of figuring that out. So I just don't feel like, obviously there are questions that the format faces and the genre faces, but I feel like there are bigger questions that a lot of the industry is facing. And in terms of the actual thing that we make, the product that we make, the form of entertainment that we do, I mean, I'm biased as somebody who loves late night and has always loved late night comedy. But I just feel like people still like it. Like, even if you look on YouTube, it's millions of people watch these segments. So the question is just figuring out where and how, in what form those are things. And those are big questions. But like, from the perspective of people who make late night, it feels like people still connect with it. Like, so to me, that makes me optimistic.
Also, how many people here, of a show of hands, watch any scripted television show in its entirety in the time slot that it airs on television?
A couple more, though, it looks like. It
doesn't seem like it's a late night issue. It seems like it's a TV issue.
Yeah.
And incidentally, just I do have separate questions for some of you guys, but just jump in on anything that that is a general question. So for each of you, go back to whatever your childhood or teen late night experiences. What is sort of your youthful platonic ideal for what late night TV is?
Mine is the one that makes every one of my late night writers cringe, because everyone's like, I was a Letterman guy. I fucking love Jay Leno so much as a kid. I loved him. And my uncle actually worked at the studio, and his thing was, when he was a bachelor, instead of like buying dinner, he would go to Jay Leno's green room and just like steal dinner every night. And eventually like they became aware that he did this, and they were like, yeah, that's just the guy who eats dinner here. And it was cool. So I got to meet Jay Leno, and I was like, I want to do this. And he was like, you will. And I was like young enough that I was like, well, he said I would. So I'm loyal to Jay Leno.
Have you had subsequent interactions with him?
No, I'm sure he doesn't remember that interaction, but I hope he still takes credit for it.
Greg?
I will say one thing about Leno, and I think that helped in contributing to me being a writer, is I am old enough that televisions had knobs when I was a kid, but they had a picture knob. And so my dad was unable to be a strict parent if things were funny. And so it was like, you can't stay up and watch the Tonight Show monologue, which in Arizona time is earlier, it's at 10:30, but you can listen to it. So he would turn the picture knob down all the way, and I would just listen to the monologue. So I would never see it, but every night I would be listening to the structure of monologue jokes. And that, I think, probably broke my brain in the correct way to do late night. But the ones that I think about, I mean, because Conan is obviously out there as like being a weird 15-year-old who's up at 12:30 to watch Conan. But I think of shows like The Red Green Show, which was on PBS. It's a Canadian show. It's a fake talk show about a guy in a moose lodge in Canada and his weird family, stuff like that. Pee-wee's Playhouse. Like these other ones, it's the idea of a show within a show that can talk about itself as a show that ultimately feels like you're watching some people get away with something. And to me, that was the thing that really sparked me in late night was, as a smart kid, you want to break all the rules. You want to get away with stuff. You want to push it as far as you can. And just to see people on TV who are ostensibly, they have big, important bosses. And to get the feeling of like, do their bosses know that they're doing this? This is on TV, so it's got to be like important, valuable time. And they're doing this dumb thing. And the glee of feeling like you're getting away with that to me is what pulled me into late night.
Yeah, I mean, so it probably explains a lot about my interests is specifically the combination of two things that I was obsessed with were Conan and The Daily Show when I was in high school and college. And Conan, obviously The Daily Show was like the cathartic respite that you go to for somebody to, in a comedic way, make sense of the craziness that is happening. And especially for millennials, like it was, from the Iraq War and the 2008 financial crisis, it was such a turbulent time to be going through high school and college that I feel like for millennials it was especially important. And in terms of Conan, like that was the thing that I loved so much about the experience of watching Late Night with Conan O'Brien was like the sense of community. Like when you would talk to other kids at school about what you saw and it feels like you're in on something, like what you were just saying, like breaking the rules. And so that is the thing that's most gratifying. And so even now, like when we do our show, the thing that's kind of the most gratifying is when it feels like there's a community of people who are talking to each other about our show. And whether it's in the YouTube comments or in any other way, when it feels like we're all doing something together is kind of the most fun thing that I feel like Conan really captured that of like, we're involved in this somehow too. Like we're in the club with Conan, like, and the third thing I just want to mention is a total a different curveball is Space Ghost Coast to Coast. I loved Space Ghost when I was a kid. And that was like the zaniness and the fact that real guests went on that show, which was incredible. Like the willingness of like real celebrities to subject themselves to like silliness was really fun to see. And that's another thing that is cool.
And there are some places, just to say that are building that community. I think we see in big and small ways. One, Seth doing corrections on Friday, doing this only online segment that feels super crazy. And why are we doing it? And that there's this little community of people who love it, and then people who kind of watch that community from the outside and enjoy it. And the other one I would say is a comedy variety show. I think you should leave. You should leave. It's not necessarily a community of people online, but you talk about Dan Flashes or like the driving crooner, and there's a whole community of people who know the meme and the joke, and you start to build that way to kind of be weird together. So there are places it's poking out. I mean, even now.
Yeah, totally. That is a great example. And I just want to say for the record, everybody on the staff, our favorite part of the week is corrections, because I don't know if everybody knows about it, or it's a thing that that Seth does. He does it entirely by himself. Nobody has any idea what it's going to be. He does it after the show on Thursday. So the real show is done taping. Everybody should theoretically be able to go home, but the crew and everybody stays afterward for this web exclusive he does, where he just continues to weave this very is snake eating its tail story of responding to people, responding to him, responding to people like online. And so the whole staff and crew piles into the studio to watch him and do it. And it's so fun. And you're right. It's that thing of like, we also feel like we're like the audience too. We work at the show, but the audience is as informed as we are about what's happening right now. I mean, I would consider. That's a great question. Am I a jackal? I feel like I might be an in the house jackal because I don't know if I can be a jackal because I've never commented on I've never corrected him online. I'm a jackal in spirit. This makes no sense to me. Well, don't watch. I'm sorry, but yes, I would love to consider myself a jackal, but I don't know if I can. That's a great philosophical question I will ponder. Yeah.
I loved your answer, Ashley, because it's my perception, based on the conversations I've had, that for about 25 or 30 years, late night has been largely the domain of the people who grew up on Letterman, and then subsequently the people who grew up on Conan, who of course grew up on Letterman. So in that sense, it's been kind of people inspired by people who broke the rules, but not necessarily people who knew the rules. And I kind of wonder if you guys think that there's importance to liking not necessarily knowing who Steve Allen was, but definitely maybe knowing who Johnny Carson was, knowing what things looked like before the irony and the postmodernism flipped it.
Yeah, I mean, I think as someone who loves the genre, I think it's important to see everyone who has done it. Yeah, you want to go back to Jack Parr, and you go back and what was it? And also looking at the idea of Dick Cavett and what is it like when a show decides to be really smart and lean in or not. But I think it's also important that there's so much stuff that has happened in between that maybe didn't become super successful, didn't last a long time, that also you have to learn from. David Alan Grier doing Chocolate News and, doing that. And Ed Helms did one season of a fake news show and it didn't go. And Larry Wilmore did The Nightly Show and all of these other shows where we say, all of these are giving us little pieces, Amber Show, which was so joyful. Like all of those pieces. I think it's to be knowledgeable both about our past, but also what are we trying and what are we doing? Because you're right. I think Letterman understood the rules and he broke them so well. Conan understood the rules and he broke them so well. But there probably are people who the rule breaking is the only part of it. And I think in any craft that's not as exciting. So yeah, I think you want to know how to do that straight up monologue. I think even, we had talked earlier about when we're talking about what comes next for late night, the era of a guy sitting at a desk talking to you really seriously about something really bad. I think Sal's called it like the alarm bell ringing kind of monologue. We've done that a lot. So much that it can be really well parodied by other shows. If that's the rules, what is the breaking those rules look like? And that is a thing that I rant to my friends incessantly about when they do not ask me to.
Yeah, I think it's the thing that gets lost sometimes is the person who was breaking the rules and being really unique at the time has become the new rule. And so like when we started on Full Frontal, it was like, oh, of course you're gonna sit behind a desk and pretend to be a news anchor because that's what comedy is. And it's like, no, that's what Jon Stewart did really, really well for such a long time that we just thought that that's what it was. And so to make the decision to be like, no desk. I think we shot one episode where Sam was in like a dress and heels and her stiletto actually like broke the stage and went through the floor. And so we're like, all right, not that. But to, instead of pretending to be like ironically removed and pretending to be Walter Cronkite or whatever as a joke, to just be like, no, I am Samantha Bee. I'm a person who lives in this world that you live in and I have opinions about what's happening and I'm going to say them as jokes. But I'm not playing a character, was like revolutionary, even though that's what everyone was doing before Jon Stewart. So I think we just forget that like every rule that gets broken, if it's successful, becomes a new rule that you have to break again.
I want to talk a bit more about the alarm bell ringing version of late night. So I'm a member of the Television Critics Association, and we had multiple years in a row where we gave our quote unquote news and information award to John Oliver and then to Samantha Bee. And both of their speeches were, why are you doing this? There are actually people who are presenting news and information. We're comedy. No one really should be getting their news and information from us. How do you guys feel about that hole that we've culturally dug ourselves into, where there really are an awful lot of people out there who only get their news as processed through the alarm bell ringer at the desk?
Well, I would say, first of all, we didn't make that choice. We've just been telling jokes about the news the whole time. But it is funny to give awards for news to late night. It's like giving a restaurant the awards for best ingredients. And you're like, yeah, we didn't grow them, we just used them. Go to the farmer. Give the farmer the award. I know, like last week tonight, just got a Peabody Award. And it said they said this like it was a compliment. They said, ostensibly a, quote, comedy, unquote, show. And like that, and as some kind of praise for look what they said about the Middle East and what's going on. And I can tell you, even inside the show, the way that line felt like a shot in the heart, the biggest insult you could get. You are only ostensibly a comedy show, and not even a comedy show, comedy in quotes. That means there's a disconnect here happening. It's when it's somebody on stage who's having a heart attack, and the audience thinks it's part of the bit. And you're like, no, you are missing what's happening here. So I don't want to talk too long on that, but yeah, I think with the alarm bell ringing stuff, it's hard because it's not a thing that was done by the shows. No host came out and said, I am important, I am serious, I'm going to change this. They came out and said, I'm going to do jokes about Adam Driver being so sexy he should kill me. And then in between that, I'm going to talk about why homelessness is bad. And then someone turned around and said, that's a reporter.
I will say though, the first season, I think it was the first season that Sam was on, so John and Sam were both on, and someone did a study, and Sam was number 1 and John was number 2 in talking about like women's health issues. Samantha Bee spent more time talking about it than CNN, MSNBC, all of the other news networks. So if you were getting your news from Samantha Bee, maybe you were getting the version of news that were the things you actually needed to know, and that's not the comedy show's fault. I think that like at a certain point, some people were telling you to distrust the news, and those people were wrong. But at the same time, the news became more bifurcated, and like I go to this channel for this type of news, and I go to this channel for this type of news. And so comedians accidentally got this form of credibility where it's like, I know you're only telling me what Sam cares about or what John cares about, but you're at least telling me that it's what Sam cares about. You're not telling me it's the news. And so it got a level of credibility in that way.
I also just say like, I think for everybody who does this, like in our case, I'll just say for us, like we're coming at it from an honest place where we feel the same as the audience of just like, with no other intent other than we are also flummoxed by everything that is happening. And so our way of processing our feeling of being flummoxed is to make jokes about it. And hopefully in the jokes, there's some catharsis and maybe there's some value. I do think like, I come from an improv background, and in improv, you start with a normal situation, and then when something unusual happens, you point at it and say like, that's unusual. And then and the audience laughs, and that's you have an intent to be like, okay, the audience just recognized that something weird happened. And that's what laughter is. And that's where the catharsis of comedy in a news context comes from, is when something weird, crazy happens, we all have an instinct to laugh at it. And so I think there's some catharsis in that. But for us, for anybody doing this kind of thing, we're just coming at it from the same place the audience is coming at, which I think maybe is why there is a connection, because news, they know more than you do. Like, or they at least give off they at least give off the feeling that they know more than you do. And we're coming off as like, no, we know just as much as you do. Like, we're experiencing what's happening the same way that you are.
And I think that there was a frustration in the audience that drove them to us because of how the media changed. Because we're handicapped that we can only use data points from the media and from journalism. But it took the New York Times years to say Trump was a racist. And so you watching as any human on earth are like, oh, duh, he's racist. Why is this giant institution that's supposed to objectively tell me how things are, they can't do it because of all these reasons? Or they can talk about police and be like, oh, well, maybe police are all actually secretly good. All of this fake both sides, like objectivity means that everyone's equal, really frustrates a bunch of people in a time of extremism. And so the only place you can go where someone's like, yeah, he's pretty racist because of the Mexican thing he said the first day he ran for president. Game, end of sentence. And the fact that like the Times can't say that, or CNN doesn't say that, or anyone else, people get frustrated and they just want someone to tell it like it is. So I think the problem isn't that comedians are telling it like it is, it's that someone else should also be doing that. Someone from a storied institution of journalism should just objectively say the facts like they are, and then that burden doesn't have to be solely on us.
Well, it's interesting because Ashley says, people getting actual news and information about female health from Sam B and from Full Frontal, that sounds like a good thing. Catharsis in a moment in which people are wrapped up in misery and discomfort sounds like a good thing. But being treated as an ostensible news source in a world where people probably need their news to come from somewhere else doesn't sound like a good thing. How do you guys negotiate the responsibilities you have that are responsibilities that you want to embrace versus the responsibilities that have been thrust upon you by people deciding they needed that?
Well, I just think Ashley and Greg have just made great points, which is like the question is for them, not for us. It's like the question is for the corporate news outlets who are asking themselves why people are going to these shows. They should be asking themselves, wait, why are people going to those shows for truth telling? And they should do some reflection about that. I mean, again, we're like, yes, we totally take it. We have to take it seriously, the responsibility to be accurate, but also we take a responsibility equally to just say what is happening, to just plainly describe. And that's where the tool of comedy is actually very valuable, is just to point out what is happening and not do false equivalence both sides stuff, which again, I think is why there's an appeal to these shows. But again, like they said, I mean, I just think that it's a question for the news outlets to ask themselves.
Well, but is it also a question, though, for either the hosts of the show, because they're the front people, or for you guys in the room to push back and say, look, I'm just not doing the 50th Trump story of this week. Let's do something silly. Where do you have that power, and where does that become your responsibility?
Well, I think it's helped by the fact that it's harder and harder to make the 50th Trump joke, because it's hard to make fun of anything for 10 years. In the same way that Leno did a lot of great things, but the OJ trial, that was it broke him. He was like, this is all we're doing, dancing Itos and all this stuff. It became a fascination. And once that becomes a fascination, eventually you're kind of like, well, we kind of said, he's big and he's fat, he played tennis. It's like, okay, we saw it enough. Something else has to happen. I don't want to watch a Mr. Bean movie every day for 10 years. The bits get old. And so I think with Trump, the bits get old, and that makes it easier now, because like Sal said, when it's shocking, the audience and the writers go, oh, we should laugh at that. And I like yesterday, the president of the United States got convicted of a zillion felonies. That's a shocking story. And everyone goes, oh, wow, we should talk about that. Donald Trump got convicted of a bunch of felonies. That could have been said anytime in any of our lifetimes. And it's not surprising, and it's not interesting. It's just, hey, a guy who does a bunch of crimes finally got caught for some crimes. Okay, so you have this conflict of The Office makes him interesting, but if you don't have The Office, it's just like the worst guy you know did a bad thing. And that's really not interesting. In the same way, if we did a late night show that was like, hey, did you know your ex-boyfriend didn't tip? You're like, oh, yeah, that's who he is. I don't need a monologue on that, I know. So I think that it makes it easier and easier to move on to other things when we've done it so much.
Yeah, I think in the Full Frontal room, it was kind of the opposite, which is that we were really interested in talking about the history of healthcare or child marriage, which I don't know how many awards I deserve for making that topic funny, but we were always interested in a larger topic that no one was talking about. And it's like, you're obligated to give people at least 3 to 5 minutes of today's news, which is often Trump. But that wasn't our desire. Our desire was often to introduce people to new topics or reintroduce people to old topics that we all thought we knew exactly what they were. And when you go back and look at it, the history was written incorrectly, so we can do that in a funny way. That was always what interested us more. But the clip that's going to go viral online is what keeps the lights on. And so you have to do that stuff too.
Is there to some degree almost a tyranny of cool, and that the pendulum is towards being smart and quote unquote informative is what is considered cool at this moment? Because I think of someone like a Fallon who doesn't necessarily make the smartness and the politics his brand. but he is constantly, for whatever it's worth, trying to do new things. Some of them are very silly, some of them work to varying degrees. But could you guys get away with pitching in rooms some of the things that Fallon does that maybe aren't necessarily getting him Emmys, but are getting out of the hamster wheel of Donald Trump?
I think one of the things is the Tonight Show is so singular. You know, we were talking about before. It's like I think Sal and I Ashley can do anything, but Sal and I would be horrible at the Tonight Show because we'd be like, look at this weird thing, and they go, no one wants this at 11:30. Regular people are still watching TV at 11:30. They don't want your weird bit where, like, you know, I don't know, some horrible joke, TK. But so I think that there's obviously room for silly, and he has millions of people watching every night and more people watching online. So I don't think it's necessarily captivated by that. I think it's that a lot of these shows have been built to talk about something important. That's what they've told you they want to do because these shows have been around for a while. You know, I think what it like Ashley's talking about, it really just depends on when we're saying important to whom. One of the episodes I'm proudest of that we did at Last Week Tonight was the black hair episode. It was a 30-minute episode that was essentially telling our audience, hey, please stop touching black people's hair. And that was a thing where it was what you're saying, people aren't talking about it. It was just, can we get, when we're talking about catharsis, it's not catharsis for people for whom Trump is the worst thing that ever happened to them in their lives. He's not the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life. Having to walk around this and most American cities knowing I could get shot for doing nothing by the police is higher than Trump on bad things in my life. Getting broken up with on Easter in high school may be higher than Donald. Jesus rose and my relationship died. But so I think it's when we're talking about what is important, what's newsworthy, what matters, it is important to chase that hierarchy, but for each room and each place, it's different. So for us, it was saying, look, we know who's watching the show. Let's do an episode that's like, here's what braids are. Here's why actors have their hair messed up on set. Here's what it looks like. Here's why you couldn't work at a McDonald's if you had dreadlocks because they were dirty. All of this stuff to explain it, you know? And it was interesting because we pushed against the hierarchy of our audience by saying this is what's most important. And at the end of the episode, John said, here's how we fix this. You Google it. You guys know all the names of Game of Thrones characters. You can figure out what a box braid is. And the comments we got were furious because they were like, "You're supposed to teach us and tell us how to do this and da 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 da." And we pushed against that hierarchy a little bit. And so I think there are places, even in these institutions that have stayed the same, where you want to push even against the hierarchy of your own show and say, this isn't what normally our audience would think is important, but it's important to us. So we're going to push it out to you. And we hope that you trust us enough to go with us.
It's also like to the silly meter. My thing is always like, what's the best vehicle for this idea? So it might be someone just standing with a mic telling you about it. We did a piece about Chris Colbert, which like nobody wants to learn about him. So we did Chris Colbert, Racist Music Man, and we did a parody of the Music Man, which is quite silly and definitely took some selling to Sam, who's not a singer or dancer. But it was like, this is the best vehicle for this very complicated story that seems like it's too complicated for me to even wrap my head around it. But when you think about it, it is the plot of the Music Man, which is easy to understand. So for me, it's never like, oh, should I do a silly idea or a serious idea? It's like, I have something I want to say, whether it's as big as a political fact or as small as we should be nice to each other. And then you make Ted Lasso. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, what is the vehicle for the thing I'm trying to say?
Yeah, we've tried to embrace silliness as much as possible. And especially since the at-home shows have really changed the DNA of our show a lot the show just got zanier and zanier because we were going insane. For example, we do this recurring thing where we never explained it, but Seth does an impression of Mike Lindell that is the guys from the SNL sketch talking about the Chicago Bears. And we never said this is the impression. He just started doing that. And at the end of every Lindell impression, he just says "da Bears," or he says a word that is a pun with "da Bears," which makes even less sense. And then we did just the other day we did an impression of Lindell talking about the Mikey Day and Ryan Gosling as the Beavis and Butthead characters on the red carpet, and we ended the impression with Seth as Lindell saying, "They need TP for da bunghole," which makes no sense. Makes no sense because it's Lindell as an SNL character talking about SNL characters as about a TV show, Beavis and Butthead from an SNL. It's so insane. But so we've tried to embrace those opportunities whenever we can because that's the world we live in. It's insane.
You mentioned the pandemic and the at-home shows, and you've had these circumstances, unprecedented circumstances in the last 5 years, really, that have forced change upon you. As you guys reflect on what you guys had to do during the at-home shows, and then what went through your mind in the months that you were off for various strikes, what were the impacts of those experiences in pushing forward what we're talking about today, what the future looks like?
I think if nothing else, you go, oh, I'm pot committed to this thing. Cause like we were shooting Black Lady Sketch Show at that time, really early. We were literally like the first show back. So no vaccines, no nothing. And you're like, I guess I love comedy because I am in a room with 80 extras who, no mask, just to make a joke. I'm here, taking the risk of getting COVID in the early days when we didn't know what it was. And it was very scary, but we were still gonna make a comedy show. So I think then, a few years later, sitting home during the strike, it's like, it became this very apocalyptic, like, is the business gonna go away? Is the industry never gonna recover? And it's like, Hollywood has worked for a really long time. The people who are making it not work now are gonna move on and go destroy another industry. That's what they do. They did journalism, then they came here, and next they'll do fast food. I don't know what their plan is. But the idea of like a person standing in front of a group of people saying, I have an idea, and making them laugh is not going to stop happening. It's just a question of how it happens. So even when we say like, is late night dying? The thing that we do, writing jokes for a funny, charismatic person, is fine. That's not broken. It's fine. We could do it right. We could write a late night show right now in this room. It'll work. It may not be our best work because we're sitting on a couch, but you'll get a chuckle out of it. It works. There's a system that's going on top of us that has like chosen to stop doing the thing that worked for a long time. It's not the product that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked before about the like sense of community, and that really came across in the at-home shows. Like we actually felt the most connected to our audience, weirdly, even though we didn't actually have one in the studio, but because we were all going through the same terrifying thing at the same time. And I've said before, and that our show before the at-home shows, before the pandemic, we kind of thought of it as like a show by sane people for sane people. And then during the at-home shows, we started to think of it as a show by formerly sane people going insane for formerly sane people going insane. We were all trapped in our home, and so we tried to use that. We started literally writing in like paintings and statues that Seth had in his little at-home studio. Like he had a wooden duck behind him that we turned into a talking duck, and we had Fred Armisen do the voice. By the way, this was happening somehow in the middle of a monologue about Donald Trump. I can't even remember how we made that happen. Or like there was a sea captain painting, and we started having Will Forte voice the sea captain talking to Seth. And so I feel like that's of a piece with the idea of processing the news. It's like, it's not just like it's the catharsis of the feeling, like the silliness is also in reaction to the world. It's actually not divorced from that. It's not like, oh, now we're going to be silly. This is not a topical show anymore. Like the silliness was a product of the fact that the world was insane, and so we were going insane too, and the people at home were going insane. And I feel like that is what created the connection. So I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of because it's topical, it has to just be like sitting at a very like specific thing. And we actually found that like it made much more sense, instead of pretending to just continue to be the same show, it made much more sense to address what was happening in the world by embracing our insanity.
Yeah, I think for Last Week Tonight, it was there was a realization that kind of stoicism, the journalistic detachment, that stuff, COVID breaks that off, even if you're trying to do that. So to be able to say, I mean, those first couple months, John is like in his house. So he's like, my kids are watching a cartoon and it's loud and they have to stop so we can tape, which like a lot of shows were in that situation. But, you know, and I'm in my house with my kids trying to get them to be quiet so I can listen to it, you know, and everyone everywhere is, we're saying it's breaking. This is crazy. And it's so crazy that I think there was a connection with the audience to go like, we're not going to pretend it's not happening to us too. Like, there's no studio, there's no show. I'm at my house. This is a backdrop. We turned the void into John Benjamin speaking as this character who hated John, as an expression of John's feeling about himself is probably accurate. He's so British, and British people, like, it's wild. I didn't know that. And then you're like, wow, British people really do not like themselves. It's wild. And then America were just like, yeah, I'm great. But like, that was it. I think it would let us connect with the audience in saying, this is the worst thing that's happened to any of us. The whole world stopped, and we're all in here with you. But I just also speak to what Ashley said. I think for me and a lot of other writers and hosts, it was a reminder of, if I stop doing this, I'm gonna have a breakdown. Like, I have to do this. If I don't get to write monologues, I'm gonna walk around my house doing monologues to my spouse, and she's gonna stab me. So like, I have to write jokes about the news. I can never stop, you know?
No, it's like medically important to have this outlet. Like, it's important for my marriage. My wife has like 3 pairs of noise canceling headphones that she puts on top of each other when we don't have a show. Like, we're on hiatus right now, and like, it's so great. That
and then because when we hang out, it's just 2 guys being like, I can't believe the senator from Idaho. I know, and he did this, and there was a potato thing. I can't stop.
Now, imagine one of us is not interested in that.
Yes, exactly.
We're married to one of
the other person's like,
Can I interest you guys in scripted television? It's real chill over here.
So, Greg, you mentioned Dick Cavett, and I was pretty sure I was going to be the first one to make that very, very cool reference on this panel. What, to your mind, is the future and the value of interviews in this space? Because I feel like when we talk about interviews these days, there's, of course, the whole promotional rut. It's the same person with the same clips going on every show doing the same thing. And then the people who are breaking it, you have Seth getting drunk with people, and then you have hot ones. And those are kind of the places in which interviews are quote unquote relevant. Does that feel like to you guys a thing that actually is important for this space that has a place still, or is it kind of a thing that we're moving away from?
I mean, I love interesting conversations with interesting people. I just think like, and also like, I like that there's a variety of ways. Like, yeah, that's what's great about Hot Ones is it's different. But then like, it's also, I love watching celebrities be silly on The Tonight Show. Like, that's something that will forever be super fun and valuable to me. And on our show, like, I think Seth, I'm biased, but I think Seth is such an incredible interviewer because he really just loves to engage with people and find out what's interesting about them and have fun with them and make them feel at ease. And there's something, again, about that is like just seeing somebody like this. I mentioned Space Ghost before because it was this thing of like celebrities being willing to subject themselves to like silliness and be a little more authentic and like, or celebrities or authors, like people who maybe don't get as much like time to do interviews. Like I love when we have like authors, for example, on our show. And Seth loves interviewing authors. So, I mean, I just feel like there's always going to be a place for interesting conversations between interesting people, especially if you can communicate across the TV screen that you are interested as well. I feel like that's what people get attached to.
And I think in the same way people, one of the things you enjoy about late night is not only are they not saying what the stodgy people are saying, you're not even saying what like primetime is saying. You're really in the late night being able to speak real or be edgy or what. So I think interviews are able to do that as well. I think the hard part is segment wise, when you're thinking about like 4 minutes is not enough time. Even when 2 people have reports, not enough. So it's like, it's that kind of thing of, I think about with Conan all the time. We'll be right back with, and now we're going to do 4 + 7. And now they did their promo. They got it out of the way. We got to know who they were. Now we're going to come back and do a big chunk of them with something stupid. So I think there are ways to lean in to that kind of interview space. I think what Desus and Mero did was a real good on-ramp in that if it feels a little dangerous to the guest and to the audience, But the guest understands that if they successfully get through this, there's a reward of, oh, they're kind of cool. You know, so when Bernie comes on Diaz Amaro and is rating sneakers, it's like there's a little bit of, it's that risk of, I might ask you something that knocks you totally off your talking points. But if you can handle that, you will prove to our audience that you're cool. I think that kind of little bit of danger, anything can happen. Letterman had it a little bit too. You know, you're coming out to promote a project. He doesn't care about the project. He's going to ask about, why is there 3 buttons on that jacket? What's up with that? Are you captain? Are there 4? Did one come off? Do you have a set backup in your pocket? And that's all he's going to talk about. That's where, when it gets knocked off the scripted, which you can do without being, I think, mean to your guests, I think that's where it's exciting. People want to see that real conversation because with social media now, when you do a press junket, everyone can see your same answers in like a TikTok compilation. So if you want to feel fresh with a late night show, I think that's where you come in and have those actual human conversations.
Do you have thoughts on interviews? No worries if you don't.
Well, I never worked on a show that did celebrity interviews.
It doesn't need to be a celebrity. I mean,
Yeah.
Sam interviewed notable people, significant people, not just people plugging products.
Yeah, like politicians and also like regular people about politics. And what happened sort of during the time that Sam was on the air. In the Jon Stewart era, the politicians would go on Jon Stewart. They would be challenged on their views, perhaps for the first time ever, and end up looking silly. And people would be like, why did they go on that show? And by the second season of Sam B, they stopped doing it. And so I think one of the reasons why people love those interviews was because we're often yelling at the screen at CNN or whatever, like ask the follow-up question, or that was obviously a lie. Say it was a lie. Ask one more question. And they never do. And comedians were able to do that for a point. And that was what one of the purposes those shows served. Now those people will no longer subject themselves to that. So who is doing that?
I want to make sure to get some questions, so think them up, and just want to ask the diversity question next, because for years, late night was the space first of 1 or 2 white men, then it maybe expanded to 3. But then there was the window where Sam got her show, where Robin Thede had her fantastic show on BET, where suddenly there was both Z-Way and Jesus and Mero on Showtime, and then now those are gone. And so it felt for a brief window as if there was actual progress where you could look and say, holy shit, there are voices that I hadn't been hearing. And then they started going away. How disheartening is that from inside? And what lessons do you think are the real lessons other than the lessons that the networks will have learned, which are almost invariably the wrong ones?
This is when I get controversial, but so there's a study that UCLA does. There's a professor at UCLA who puts out a study literally every year, and the studios actually donate to pay for it. So they pay for him to do a study, and every year he says, the closer to the makeup of America your show is in front of and behind the camera, so 50% female, 13% black, whatever those numbers are, the closer your show or movie gets to that, the more money it makes. All things being equal, more diverse equals more money. Every year he puts that report out. Every year they pay him to do so. Every year they don't do it. So the lesson that we all need to learn is that they don't care. It's not actually, like if we're saying, oh, those people, they just care about money. If they just cared about money, they would do the thing. So when you mention all of those shows that aren't around anymore, most of those shows got decent to good ratings. And when shows don't cost a lot of money to make, you only need to get decent ratings. They weren't canceled because of ratings. They were canceled because we got to a moment where the networks felt like we don't have to do this anymore. And it's not a have to for the audience. We love watching Amber. I think Jokes Seth Can't Tell is probably one of the most popular segments because people love watching Amber and Jenny. It's not, and they like to blame the audience and go, oh, we could give so-and-so a show, but is anyone gonna watch it? They are, they historically have, they do. The networks don't wanna make them, and we just have to be real about that.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes your show better. Like, Joke Seth Can't Tell is amazing. Like, and that's another thing that's like a highlight of for the staff is also just to like go, because it's so fun. Like, and this is where Seth is amazing. Like, Seth loves, his favorite part of a thing is oftentimes to just sit there while other people get to do their thing. And like Joke Seth Can't Tell is a perfect example of that, or Amber Says What. we're very lucky that there's a lot of space on our show for like writers to voice their perspectives, and so it just makes your show better. And so like Joke Seth Can't Tell is just every time it's so electrifyingly fun, and everybody loves it. So yeah.
Well, and I think historically, we worked really hard in the Writers Guild East to create a diversity pledge on the writer staff level to help keep the numbers up from 2020 and to ask showrunners to be able to explain if they go down. But part of the reason that those shows you're talking about failed is, like, John Oliver's first season, he had 22 episode order. Most of these shows, like Z-Ways, you get 6 episodes a year, which you cannot build an audience that way. You cannot build a habit that way.
You also can't build a staff that way.
Yes.
Who can afford to work 6 weeks out of the year and then wait for their 6 weeks to come again? You're going to continually be losing staff members. You cannot make TV that way.
Yeah, and it was one of the biggest fights we had in the strike for late night, was making sure that writers got at least 13 weeks pay. Even though the show's going to turn over and you're going to have to leave, at least you're making enough money to make health insurance for that 6 episode season. I worked on Game Theory with Bomani Jones, 6 episodes. 1 year gap, 8 episodes. Then they say it's canceled. Well, who got used to watching it? Because Fallon is on 5 times a week, and so was Conan, and so is everybody else, and Oliver's on 30 times a year. And every show with a black or diverse host, it's like, well, we did 6 and nobody started watching. Because you didn't want that to happen. The goal of these shows is to do 2 things. One, to get the audience to like stop being mad. Stop being mad at us, they're all white. We gave you some black people, they're in the promo materials. We show Black Lady Sketch Show in every collage of people to show how we have black people. So stop being mad at us about it. And then the other one is to continually do this thing where they say, well, these shows are breaking the mold. They're reinventing late night. They're doing it totally different. To me, the real progress is there are like 5 desks where old white guys sit on network TV and tell jokes. Give a black person one of those desks, because that's how you reinvent the show. You don't have to change the format, the time slot, the set. You don't have to change any of that stuff. Put a black person behind that desk, put a woman behind that desk, woman of color, and put somebody from First Nations, somebody behind that desk, and the jokes will change, and what's important will change, and what we have to talk about tonight will change. Because that's when we get that progress. It's still funny, it's still different. But in reality, those shows are there, like we talked about, so that America can watch at the end of the night and go, okay, I feel good about the news, I can go to sleep. And there are a lot of executives out there who do not believe that America will watch a black person while they're laying in bed and be comfortable enough to go to sleep. And that's what we have to push past.
Meanwhile, it's most Americans' dream to see a black person while they're in bed.
Specifically, Idris Elba specifically.
Let's just be real.
Hello, love, I'm gonna tuck you in.
Let's get a couple questions from the. I got questions from the audience. I definitely have more. So the back row center. Yes, you.
Sorry, I didn't know if there was a microphone. Oh, cool. Hello. I'm wondering, for those of you who've held sort of like higher level positions as writers, in working, collaborating with other writers, I know with late night rehearsal to tape and a lot of like rewriting, it's fast and furious. There's stories of people kind of like taking the entire script and rewriting it to be what they want. How do you navigate letting in other voices and jokes? I mean, there's jokes Seth can't tell, but how do you navigate when to rewrite and sort of write your own jokes versus like letting a few of the writers' jokes in and seeing like, I don't know if they're gonna go, but like I'm gonna take this risk.
And why are you asking this question?
I run a queer trans late night show on Brooklyn Public Access called Late Stage Live, and I'm the head writer, so yeah. Thank you.
I think a big one is just the biggest laugh wins. So there are times, and it's so weird to get old. I'm sure it'll never happen to you, but you get to an age where you're like, someone says something and everyone else in the room laughs, and you're like, oh, I don't know why that's funny, but I trust that it is because everyone else laughed. Maybe I have to ask someone to explain it to me. But it's just, instead of keeping your worldview, like realizing that your sense of humor is not universal or objective. And so if 90% of the people in the room laugh at something that you didn't think was funny, 90% of the audience might think it's funny too, and just like trusting the laugh.
Either you guys have?
I mean, I feel I came from an improv background where the whole idea is collaborative. So for me, the most fun is for everybody to kind of like be in a room together. And that's the most fun for me about writing at our show. I think the most important thing is just that everybody feels empowered and comfortable to pitch. And yeah, of course, not your pitches aren't always going to get picked, or your jokes will not always get picked. But as long as everybody feels like it's a genuinely collaborative and environment, and I'm so lucky to feel like I work at a place like that, like everybody, then that's the fun part, is getting together and ping-ponging back and forth. So I feel like if you create that environment, then it becomes fun and productive. And then everybody understands if sometimes, oh, that joke was funny or whatever. Like, so making it collaborative and inclusive and then it becomes fun.
What else we got from? Can't tell. Do you have a question back there? Oh yeah. Okay. Excellent. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if you had a mic and we're looking for someone. Excellent.
Hi. I have a TikTok question or an election question. Which one would you want? Doesn't matter.
Dealer's choice.
Dealer's choice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll ask, I guess, the election one. Wanted to continue to pull this thread that you'd mentioned just around like the objectivity, especially just in politics. And I wanted to ask, like, in an era where, I believe and I agree with what you were saying around like the comedian's job with politics. But I was going to say in an era too where people sense and access to just unbiased media is really bifurcated, which is what you were talking about with the New York Times. It's like, what is the impact now of having politicians on comedic programs? Like, are they sort of in on the joke, especially those two of maybe more extremist views, in potentially like normalizing whatever it is that they're talking about? But again, wanted to ask, like, in this era specifically, knowing that yes, for years, there's Arsenio, what is it with Bill Clinton, right? And the impact of that. Like, we know that politicians have been on late night programs for years, but like, especially now, I'm just curious to hear you talk more about the responsibility or the impact. Thank you.
You had the president on your show like a month ago. Yeah. I feel like your answer would be better than mine.
Well, I think one thing we just realized is like, yeah, I mean, you asked about normalizing, like, one thing that's unique about our shows is we don't have to have anybody on the show that we don't want to have. So if it's somebody who there's no point in, that's the frustrating thing, and that part of it is and I think this comes back again to before I was talking about like the catharsis of what we do. The frustrating thing is there's often not because there is one side, I will say, that rejects observed reality, I guess is the way I would say that. Like, it's one thing to have a guest on and have a shared understanding of the facts and then try to debate them or grill them. But when they don't even inhabit the same reality that you do, then I think there's a question of what's the value of having that person on. And that has become more clear, I think, to all of these shows, which is a big difference from the past.
And in the first term of Trump, I know like at Colbert, we were there and we had on a lot of people who like Scaramucci came on. And I don't know if he was the one who talked about stabbing people. He brought Stephen a knife or something. Like we had all of these, like every disgraced weird figure we had on. And I think if you look back now, I mean, some people there were saying it was a bad idea then. But I think if you look back now, it's a bad idea to be a prisoner of the moment, to bring on people who might be infamous. You want to bring on people who, yeah, you can, even if you disagree, be like, so we're on Earth. Not somebody who's going to be just like a tabloid headline. I think there is a danger there, yeah, of making them seem like they're respectable.
I think also we talk about the tension between comedy and news on these shows. So from a news standpoint, yes, but also from a comedy standpoint, the way a joke works is the setup is we establish reality and we all agree what reality is. And then the punchline is surprising because we all agreed on what reality is. So if we don't, it's not good news, but it's also not funny. So why are we doing it?
And just as a last question, we've talked about the future of late night as the topic, and we've talked about the present. If we had this panel in 5 years, what is something that you would hope would be the past of late night? Something that if we had this conversation in 5 years, we'd be done with. And just a quick answer on that. Obviously not an easy answer, but.
I think exactly what Greg was talking about earlier. I hope it'll be the past that some hosts get the 22 episode order and the full staff and the full studio and the ability to slowly find their feet. And some hosts get, you have 2.5 seconds to put a show together. And if it doesn't work immediately, we're getting rid of it. I think we need to, if we're going to make television, it's an expensive, difficult endeavor. You either invest in it or you don't.
Again, I'm biased because Seth doesn't wear a suit, but I'm going to say suits. Yeah. I like. It feels even funnier to me that Seth is. I love. It's. Yeah. I think everybody should just wear plaid like Seth.
Well, not everybody's from like New Hampshire, but I would say the thing is, in 5 years, I hope we're past asking is late night dead, because we've been asking it for 40 years, and the answer keeps being no. But I think part of that will be that you have all these channels like Pluto TV, who's here at the festival. Fast TV is like television. There's incredible room for late night to be there. You have a schedule, you have to fill, you've got shows. So I think that we'll see an expansion of late night into that space, and then be in a place where we're not going, is late night dead? We'll be going, please stop asking me to watch 5 monologues a night. There's too many late night shows.
Oh, just really quickly to that, that what it is will expand, because like there's a late night show on QVC right now. Busy Phillips has a late night show on QVC, and it's just a late night show where you can buy everything on the set. So we like, we're saying like, oh, it's too expensive, we can't afford it. There are ways to figure out how to make the economics work, like selling the clothes the host is wearing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, Greg, and Sal. And thank you all for coming out.